Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to take your seats, please? Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order the fourth plenary meeting of the international meeting entitled Stockholm+50, A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity. This afternoon, the international meeting will conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 7, the general debate. May I once again remind participants of the time limit of 3 minutes and that longer versions of the statements can be made available on the website of the international meeting. We still have a long list of speakers, and I wish to remind speakers of the time limits of 3 minutes for national statements and of 5 minutes for statements delivered on behalf of groups. Longer versions of statements can be made available on the website of the international meeting. I would like to remind speakers that a timer is being projected on the screen. In case speakers exceed their time limit by 1 minute, the microphone will be automatically deactivated. I apologize in advance if speakers are cut off. This measure is being taken to ensure that all speakers can deliver their statements in the limited time available. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Mrs. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Latvia fully aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Stockholm+50 international meeting provides us with the opportunity to review and evaluate important decisions and actions that have been taken over the last 50 years. The overarching goal is to meet 2030 agenda and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in cross-cutting issues such as environmental and climate change. At this year's United Nations High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, Latvia will present its second voluntary national review on implementation of Sustainable Development Goals in our country. Over the past years, Latvia has made a great effort of implementing the European Green Deal, addressing the COVID-19, and also increasing cooperation on the global level. There can be no sustainable development without peace. Latvia strongly condemns Russia's unprovoked military aggression against Ukraine and expresses grave concern about its global consequences. On global health of planet, I would like to highlight the growing role of sustainability and production, as well as promotion of circular economy. The unsustainable consumption and production patterns are the main reasons for the worldwide decline of biodiversity. For example, the global ecological footprint shows that during the last decades, the global ecological overshoot has actually increased. Human demand for natural capital exceeded the carrying capacity of our environment. As soon as we start looking at the economy as being circular, we see areas of a potential. We are aiming to promote efficient use of resources, including recycling our reused products. On eco-efficiency, we have to recognize that if we want to stay committed to the transition, we must work in close partnership at all levels. As an example, Latvia has developed green public procurement, which is based on life cycle approach. I believe that leadership dialogues will help us to find solutions on difficult issues to strengthen the environmental dimension of sustainable development globally. Thank you.
I thank the I thank the representative of Latvia. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Excellencies, we congratulate Sweden and Kenya for co-hosting and being co-presidents of this important international conference. Sweden's hosting of the 1972 United Nations Conference on the Human Environment was a seminal moment in human history. The principles adopted here in Stockholm in 1972 led to the recognition of the fundamental nexus between the protection of the environment and the progress with sustainable development broadly. We congratulate Kenya, which also hosts the headquarters of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, for their global leadership and steadfast commitment to sustainable development. South Africa aligns itself with the statements of the G77 and China and Africa Group respectively. The evidence of the existential threat that humanity faces from runaway climate change is increasing, abundant, and is confirmed time and again in reports of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We also know that this crisis impacts worst on the poorest countries amongst us. Beyond climate change, it is increasingly clear that we are confronted with a triple planetary crisis which encompasses human-caused destruction of nature and the raising of pollution levels, in addition to and compounding upon the climate crisis. The common thread that runs through the triple planetary crisis, as UNEP has pointed out, is unsustainable production and consumption. Stockholm+50 marks 50 years of international cooperation on the environment since the landmark 1972 UN conference. We view this meeting as an important stock-taking opportunity to reflect on these efforts and to strengthen our collective resolve and commitment to urgently tackling this triple planetary crisis. Allow me to offer some reflections from a South African perspective on these complex challenges that we face. On the existential threat of climate change, we remain firmly committed to a multilateral solution which ensures that developing countries are not unfairly disadvantaged in their development. Adequately financing developing countries is just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy is critical in realizing the true potential of the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol to avoid a climate calamity. We call on the international community to support Africa's initiatives in this regard, which include the African Green Stimulus Program and the African Union Green Recovery Action Plan adopted at the 35th Ordinary Session of the AU Assembly held in Addis Ababa in February 2022. We are also pleased that Africa is host to two major environment meetings this year. The Republic of Cote d'Ivoire recently hosted the 15th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification in Abidjan, and the Arab Republic of Egypt will be hosting the 27th session of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in November 2022. On the latter, we call for the international community to lend its strong support.
I thank the representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicky. Уважаемая госпожа
Madam Vice President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize the importance of the UN Conference on the Human Environment, which took place in 1972. The main outcome of that event was the establishment of the UN Environmental Programme, UNEP. We stand convinced that in its work, UNEP should afford heightened attention to the needs of developing and least developed countries, taking into consideration the national circumstances of every state when providing technical assistance to a given country with a view to boosting their environmental potential. Given the theme of this event, we'd like to highlight how important it is to promote sustainable consumption and production across the board. This is a prerequisite if we are to deliver on the theme of this meeting. Having said that, we take as our starting point that in the countries of the collective West, well, they bear a weighty responsibility to reduce consumption levels. Unbridled consumer demand, first and foremost in the United States, in the UK, and in the EU, puts colossal pressure on the environment in developing countries. The very countries where mineral deposits, as well as the main types of environmentally hazardous industrial production are concentrated. What's more is, the price which developing countries get for what they produce is far from fair. This has a corrosive effect on the socioeconomic circumstances of the people living in these developing countries, as well as on the environment there. We're in favor of growing scientific work done by UNEP with participation of experts from all geographical regions. In light of this, we call on everyone to strictly adhere to the principle of equitable geographical representation among UNEP Secretariat staff in keeping with the UN Charter and the relevant resolution which was adopted at the last UNEA session. We believe that it is unacceptable to politicize UNEP activities, watering down the programme's clear-cut technical environmental mandate, including by implementing projects in non-core areas such as peace and security, conflicts, and the defense of human rights. Such practices mean that the program simply doesn't have enough resources left over to deliver on truly essential environmental objectives. For instance, currently, UNEP is de facto not paying attention to full life cycle assessments when implementing new technologies and the way that these technologies have a cumulative, comprehensive impact on the environment, including at the resource extraction, production, and disposal phases. We're in favor of UNEP's work remaining neutral and professional. We don't want UNEP to turn into a tool for green protectionism, furthering the economic interests of a select group of countries. The environmental agenda should bring people together, not divide them, nor should it result in additional trade barriers being erected. The Russian Federation has been accused of supposedly invading the Ukraine. The special military operation we're conducting in Ukraine is something we're compelled to do because of the terror and the war that has been waged on the people of the DPR and Elena. This has been going on for 8 years now. 13,000 people have perished as a result. The special operation in Ukraine is aimed at demilitarizing and denazifying that country so that it becomes a neutral, peaceful state. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation.
In accordance with relevant provisions of General Assembly Resolution 75/326, the meeting will now hear statements by representatives of the intergovernmental organizations. I now give the floor to the representative of the Council of Europe.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in my capacity as a representative of the Council of Europe, I should like to state that it is an honor and a privilege to partake in this UN conference, Stockholm+50. We should like to thank Sweden and Kenya for their very warm hospitality. We'd also like to congratulate the United Nations, specifically the United Nations Environment Programme, for preparing this historic meeting. The Stockholm Declaration, as well as the Action Plan adopted back in 1972, are essential reference texts. They've given rise to an institutional and standard-setting framework that's absolutely unique. They're also a source of inspiration for the international community as a whole. It's a very valuable source. It's vital that we continue this work. Over these years, the Council of Europe has adopted a number of fundamental texts on human rights, the environment, including water, soil, air, and biodiversity, spatial planning, major natural and technological hazards, cultural heritage, and the landscape. 5 international conventions have been ratified by a large number of states. We've also adopted partial agreements. The European Court of Human Rights has also developed case law on the human right to the environment. A manual on this topic has been recently updated. The Stockholm Declaration speaks to the human right to the environment, but it also stipulates that we have a solemn duty to protect and improve the environment for both the current generation and subsequent generations. In order to live up to these provisions, and with a view to contributing to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers recently adopted a recommendation. The objective is to implement the Council of Europe Landscape Convention. It's entitled Landscape and Responsibility of Stakeholders for Sustainable and Harmonious Development. The aim is to promote development that's both sustainable and harmonious. It's about getting people out there in the field to contribute to this process. It's also about inviting school teachers to raise awareness in schools amongst pupils about these issues. A teaching booklet on the topic has been crafted. It's not about making the young generation feel guilty, but about making them aware about the riches, the beauty that they're surrounded by. It's important that they can marvel at this nature, that they become the masters of their destiny. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of the Council of Europe. I now give the floor to the representative of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, distinguished participants, colleagues, and friends. We are all gathered here in beautiful green, clean, as we learned yesterday, smart Stockholm, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first international meeting addressing the environmental crisis, the 1972 United Nations Conference on Human Environment that gave birth to UNEP, and also to galvanize more international and governmental support to address the 3 planetary crises that are threatening our existence and the well-being of the planet. Since 1972, a lot has been done, yet not enough to save our planet, our only home for the present generation and for those to come. The UN system is leading the global transformative action to protect and restore the environment, and all international and regional organizations need to emulate the example by joining the existing initiative and by implementing new and innovative ones. The BSEC Permis is fully engaged in doing its part in the troubled Black Sea region. In the Black Sea Economic Agenda towards an enhanced BSEC partnership, adopted in April 2001, the environment protection and conservation is one of the most principal goals, namely number 5, but its objectives are declined in almost all the other goals. This activity is supported by the member states through the Working Group on Environment Protection and Conservation, and also through BSEC-EU dialogue and through the cooperation with the other international organizations, and most notably the World Bank, FAO, and UNDP. Furthermore, in April 2012, and in December 2017 were adopted respectively the joint Belgrade Declaration on Climate Change and Green Economy and the BSEC Climate Change Adaptation Strategy for the Black Sea, where the member states committed to develop regional approaches on climate change measures with respect to the capabilities of the communities, ensuring energy security and sustainable development, and continue efforts on forward-looking approaches in the BSEC region towards green development as part of coordinated regional response to climate change and a basis for sustainable development that will enhance economic activity, investments, entrepreneurship, and employment, but also focusing on a gradual turn towards new technology, including cleaner energy and higher energy efficiency projects. The endorsement of the Common Maritime Agenda for the Black Sea by the riparian countries in May 2019 has created a new dynamic in the region and established a platform for the preservation and restoration of the environment of the Black Sea, for the development of blue and green economies, and building a greener and more environmentally friendly transport system. In connection to this, and with the framework of the Working Group of Environmental Protection and BSEC-EU dialogue, a number of joint projects financed by different international organizations and by the EU Commission are being implemented. And you can find them all in the longer version that will be published online. Wishing success to the working of the...
I thank the representative of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization. I now give the floor to the representative of the University for Peace.
Thank you, Madam President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, I would like to thank the co-host, the government of Sweden and Kenya, for giving us the opportunity to participate in this critical meeting for the health of the planet and survival of humanity. As the world's largest humanitarian network with presence through national societies in 192 countries, the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies is witnessing firsthand within the last 50 years since the Stockholm Conference, planetary crises have become humanitarian crises. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution have created an unprecedented need for humanitarian assistance, threatening human development and survival of humanity. Climate-related natural hazards are already displacing more than 20 million people every year. We are seeking increasing food and water insecurity. Degraded ecosystems are amplifying disaster risks, destroying livelihoods, and increasing health threats. Those most affected by the crisis are the poor and vulnerable people and communities. These are the people and contexts where the International Red Cross Society is most engaged and where we can play an active role in supporting the most affected by planetary crisis. The Stockholm +50 outcome should therefore encourage governments and the global community to 1. Recognize that planetary crises are humanitarian crises. with humanitarian impacts that we collectively need to prepare for, respond to, and reduce risk from planetary crises that are already happening and those expected to increase in the future. 2, effective climate action and disaster risk reduction must be scaled up. Reduce risk from vulnerable communities and the ecosystem they depend on, including integrated approaches to resilience and nature-based solutions. 3, governments must put in place coherent multi-sectoral policy and legal frameworks that provide the incentives and obligations for such actions. 4, climate and environmental finance from both the public and private sources must be increased and flexible as to reach those most in need and currently left behind, especially in countries that every year experience climate-related disasters, most at-risk communities in protected settings and fragile contexts, including conflict-affected countries. Now it's time for action. Now it's time to turn our commitments and priorities into locally led climate and environmental action that reaches the most vulnerable. Our ambition must be to reduce the planetary crisis and to reduce humanitarian crises. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the University for Peace. I now call on my co-president, Madam Frida.
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, one of the greatest contributions of the Stockholm Conference 50 years ago was to approve an action plan on a set of principles for the protection of the human environment. 50 years ago, some of the principles represented a breakthrough. In many ways, these principles have evolved and grown, some of them becoming the very foundation on which international environmental law is built. Moreover, some of them embody a mandate for the international community and for the institution that I represent here, the University for Peace, established per the United Nations General Assembly resolution on December 1980. For example, Principle 19 established the follows: education in environmental matters for the younger generation as well as adults, giving due consideration to underprivileged, is essential in order to broaden the basis for an enlightened opinion and responsible conduct by individuals, enterprises, and communities in protecting and improving the environment and its full human dimension. It is necessary that at this meeting we can reaffirm the principles approved 50 years ago, but also we must commit ourselves to provide governments and the mandates approved by the international organizations with the resources and supports to be able to fulfill the objectives entrusted to them. In the case of the institution that I represent, the University for Peace, we work permanently to train young generations in our postgraduate programs in the areas of conservation, sustainable and socially just development and peace. The University for Peace, established decades ago with the vision of the then Secretary General, Kofi Annan, and our former rector, Maurice Strong, a department in development and environment, offering master's degrees and doctoral programs in environment, development and peace, environment security and governance, natural resources and sustainable development, climate change, sustainable food systems, and responsible management for sustainable economic development. Also, the University for Peace works in partnership with other UN agencies, bodies, and programs in different parts of the world, but especially in the Global South, building environmental resilience with local communities, academic communities, and NGOs. However, education is a tool which has not been fully implemented to the broader public to raise awareness about environmental degradation and the resultant risk of it developing into a major conflict. Environmental education is a process that allows individuals to explore environmental issues, engage in problem solving, and taking action regarding the environmental crisis. As the UNESCO Constitution reads, "Since wars begin in the minds of men, it's in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed." The best way to defend peace, to construct a sustainable peace with the environment, is to educate people, as Principle 19 of the Stockholm established 50 years ago. The University for Peace, their faculty, students, and thousands of alumni around the world are ready to offer their services, expertise, and experience for the common goal of sustainable development. If you want peace, prepare for peace. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the University for Peace. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat for the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer and the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer.
Vice Presidents, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The UN Conference on the Human Environment was convened in 1972 in Stockholm, placing environment firmly on the international agenda as an issue of key importance in human development, well-being, and prosperity. It marked the beginning of environmental diplomacy. It led to the establishment of UNEP, hosted by Kenya. I would like to congratulate and thank Sweden, Kenya, and UNEP for the excellent organization of this celebratory international meeting. It is truly a wonderful and important event. Since 1972, the structure of international environmental law changed and became a global framework encompassing broader processes of international law. The first MEAs negotiated under the auspices of UNEP were the 1985 Vienna Convention and its 1985 Montreal Protocol, to address the threat of ozone layer depletion from man-made chemicals such as CFCs. The Montreal Protocol has led to the phase-out of about 99% of ozone-depleting substances and put the ozone layer back on path to recovery. As ODSs are potent greenhouse gases, the Montreal Protocol has contributed significantly to climate change mitigation. With the latest Kigali Amendment, it is estimated that up to 0.4 degrees centigrade of warming will be avoided by 2100 through HFCs phase down and with energy efficiency improvements in equipment and systems in the cooling sector, the climate benefits can potentially double. This year, the Montreal Protocol celebrates its 35th birthday. In a few decades, humanity went from facing a major threat to human health and environment, from the harmful ultraviolet radiation, to being far safer because the ozone layer is healing. The Montreal Protocol worked because everybody was on board. Science identified a major threat. Governments listened. The private sector reformed their businesses. Everybody benefited. It is one of the powerful examples of successful multilateralism. With strong global partnership among governments, private sector, civil society, and the academia, consensus can be built and challenges can be met to ensure sustainable development, well-being, and prosperity for all. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat for the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer and the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer. I now give the floor to the representative of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance.
Madam President, Excellencies, 50 years ago, the UN Conference on the Human Environment agreed on the first generation of common principles to inspire and guide the peoples of the world in the preservation and enhancement of the human environment. Later decades witnessed the expansion of such principles through the recognition of a rights-based approach grounded on the need to strengthen public participation, access to information, and access to justice to protect the environment. These are fundamental steps for framing today's Stockholm+50 conversation within the building blocks of environmental democracy. Ensuring the quality and inclusiveness of governance institutions will be essential to successfully deliver on climate action. International IDEA notes that inclusive democratic governance institutions allow the rights and views of indigenous people and local communities to be channeled into the decision-making on environmental policies and actions. International IDEA welcomes the strong emphasis put on justice, inclusion, intergenerational equity, and accountability in the leadership dialogues, and underlines that responding to citizens' demands for these rights suggests the need to urgently strengthen democratic governance, rights, and institutions. Citizen voices and arguments must be heard for societies to collectively debate and agree about what a just transition implies. International IDEA's research on climate change and democracy indicates that democracies can perform this role by allowing a free flow of information, policymakers to debate and find solutions, and civil society and citizens to mobilize and create a social consensus around the required actions. It also indicates that democracies are more effective against climate change by allowing freedom of expression, an active civil society, elections held with integrity, and institutional checks and balances. We propose that in the response to climate crisis, democratic governance agendas should seek out innovative forms of political deliberation and representation, and such as citizen assemblies, lowering the voting age, institutions that are already considering the interest of future generations in today's decision-making. In conclusion, International IDEA emphasizes that functioning democratic institutions are indispensable to deal effectively with the climate crisis. We should all strive together for democratic processes that implement innovative and effective approaches to addressing environmental challenges. The efforts to protect and support democratic institutions will need to be strengthened to ensure that the next decade of climate action is inclusive, just, and ultimately successful. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the co-hosts of this meeting, Kenya and Sweden. I join you here today to share one example of how the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment planted the seeds for global environmental governance solutions to a critical problem. The Minamata Convention on Mercury is the youngest global environmental treaty. It addresses mercury across many sectors and at every stage of the life cycle. It is smartly designed and fully implementable. It is reasonable to expect that in some 20 years from now, there will be no new mercury pollution. We can draw a straight line from Stockholm to the birth of the Minamata Convention in 2013. Victims of Minamata disease, caused by a metal mercury poisoning from discharges by chemical factories, sent a representative to Stockholm in 1972 with a mission to be seen and heard. They joined their voices to those of other civil society and indigenous peoples groups to call for action that is evidence-based, equity-focused, and gender-responsive. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, mercury is so detrimental to human health and the environment that there is only one plausible way forward, and that is to phase out its use and eliminate its emissions. I believe that the Minamata Convention stands as a guiding light for common sense global cooperation. Through the international negotiation process convened by the United Nations Environment Programme, the world put in place a coherent set of legally binding obligations that is grounded in science, is practical and realistic, and has equity at its core. Implementation of this treaty by EU parties allow us to envision a transformed global gold market that continues to generate billions of dollars, but has no place for unsustainably sourced gold, such as with mercury use. Instead, millions of artisanal and small-scale gold miners have proper working conditions and secure livelihoods in the sector or in alternative sectors. Mercury is no longer used in products and processes because better alternatives exist. Primary mercury mining is stopped. There is no longer a market for its trade, and any excess mercury is safely disposed of. Emissions of mercury from industries are no longer a threat. And lastly, exposure to mercury of especially women and children, and through them, future generation, is prevented. As with any environmental commitment ever undertaken, we are facing issues of unsustainable consumption and production, human rights, gender equality, degradation of diverse ecosystems, and the challenges of the global economy and financing. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world cannot and will not fail to make mercury history. I call on additional countries to ratify the convention, and I invite stakeholders to help to keep the momentum, be partners, watchdogs, and protectors for the health of all of us and for the health of this planet. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. In accordance with relevant provisions of General Assembly Resolution 75/326, the meeting will now hear statements by representatives of United Nations specialized agencies, funds, and programs. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm addressing you today on behalf of the Secretariat of the UN Economic Commission for Europe. Allow me to start with a short excursion into the past, when environment was not a widely discussed issue. Imagine 1955, when the issue of pollution was raised for the very first time at the UNEC meeting on inland waterways. 5 years on, 1960, UNEC sponsored a conference on water pollution. And then finally, in May 1971, UNEC organized the Prague Symposium on problems relating to environment, a stepping stone to the UN Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm a year later. Today, UNEC is honored to host 16 international legally binding instruments on environment, 5 conventions and 11 protocols on air pollution, environmental impact assessment, industrial accidents, transboundary waters, water and health, and public participation. Looking ahead, I would like to confirm UNEC's commitment to first, continue facilitating dialogue between member states and other stakeholders to address the triple planetary crisis. The Environment for Europe ministerial conferences, for which the UNEC serves as a secretariat, provide a powerful platform for such dialogue. We thank the government of the Republic of Cyprus for hosting the 9th ministerial conference later this year in October. We hope ministers from the region and beyond will take an active part in the ministerial conference, so we make progress on 2 key themes: sustainable infrastructure and circular economy in sustainable tourism. Second, we need to make sure that multilateral environmental agreements, those hosted by UNEC and many others about which we are hearing here today, bring actual impact on the ground in member states, and across borders. This means that we need to advocate for more member states to join the agreements, and it means we need to be providing demand-driven technical assistance to our partners, to our member states, based on evidence, including generated through UNECE environmental performance reviews. This also means we need to engage much more strongly with the UN resident coordinators and UN country teams on the ground. Third, we need synergies across domains, including various domains of UNECE mandate with other UN agencies. And here we really happy to be part of the Environmental Management Group and the One Planet Network with the world of finance, with civil society and private sector partners. You can count on UNECE as a partner in making the spirit of Stockholm and the decisions of this meeting a reality. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat.
I have the honor of making this statement on behalf of Maimouna Mohammed Sharif, Executive Director of UN Habitat. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the 1972 Stockholm Conference addressed the natural and built environments as a singular, indivisible ecosystem. Harmony between the two remains critical. Development cannot come at the cost of the environment. However, the natural and built environments have drifted apart. Their mandates are often pursued as separate trajectories. Fortunately, the 2016 New Urban Agenda reinforced cities as multi-level systems, systems that can effectively tackle the confluence of the 3 Cs of climate, conflict, and COVID-19. The built stock of our cities and towns may well double by 2050. Whether we meet the triple planetary crisis head-on depends on the quality of what we build. Unfortunately, development models are increasingly promoting sprawl, segregation, and privatization. These, in turn, are exacerbating emissions and desertification, decreasing natural habitat, and relegating the urban poor to informal settlements. Short-term material gain is also depriving future generations of an equitable future. We must find our way back to urbanizing in harmony with nature. This is fully within our power. When done right, cities can decouple growth from environmental impact. Abandoning business as usual and pursuing compact, integrated, and connected cities makes that possible. Doing things right offers many synergies. Curbing sprawl not only conserves natural habitat, but it also reduces the transmission of deadly diseases. Shifting commutes from private cars to public transit not only reduces emissions, but also improves air quality and public health. Doing things at scale, as we did in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, must be the new normal. The 15-minute city, for example, co-locates places of home, work, and services. By reducing the spatial and metabolic footprint of human settlements, we also reduce many of the drivers of climate change, desertification, and biodiversity loss. Sustainable cities are essential for the sake of the climate, other species, and indeed ourselves. But cities can't do it alone. National policies and international agendas need to promote healthy urban systems and dynamics. And governments at all levels need to work together to eliminate perverse subsidies. With your help, better cities can help us achieve the world we need. Thank you.
I thank the representative of UN Habitat.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be here today to speak on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. FAO, one of the co-organizers of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, testifies our deep commitment to environment stewardship for the benefit of humankind. Since then, we have been leading global discussion, supporting programs and setting standards in food and agriculture. And yet, as we meet today, the Earth has crossed 4 of its 9 planetary boundaries. The negative impacts are disproportionately felt in the food and agriculture. But agri-food systems are also part of the solution. Transforming our agri-food systems to become more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable is essential to reverse the growing highs of hunger and undernourishment in a world soon to reach 10 billion people. Resilient and productive land and aquatic ecosystems are the foundation of sustainable agri-food system and a key solution to tackle global environment, health, and food security crisis. When we talk about a healthy planet for the prosperity to all, we must recognize that we cannot build a future, think of economic recovery, or imagine achieving the sustainable goals on an unhealthy planet. The multiple and often overlapping challenge we face, the climate crisis, conflict, COVID-19, and soaring food prices are hitting the poorest the hardest, most of whom depend on food and agriculture, forests and fisheries for their livelihoods. Just as the 1972 conference used the word human in his title, we too must be human-centered. We must leverage the power of science, data, technologies, and innovation to support smallholder farmers, rural communities, women, youth, and indigenous people, the stewardship of our natural resources. We must increase investment in transformative tools and strategies to benefit them. The best way we can bring about positive, transformative change is through meaningful collaboration. There is no time to lose. Let's get to work together. FAO stands ready to collaborate. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. I now give the floor to the representative of the International Telecommunication Union.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address the plenary. The International Telecommunication Union has been working on opportunities and challenges of digital technologies for the environment for many years and welcomes that this topic has been featured at various occasions over the last 2 days. We also applaud the multi-stakeholder engagement in the context of Stockholm+50, including the UN system consultations conducted through the Environment Management Group. Cross-industry public-private partnerships are at the heart of ITU's work through its diverse membership, including governments, industry, academia, and various regional and international organizations. In this regard, we would first like to highlight the importance of working together for the development and implementation of policies and international standards to ensure that digital transformation goes hand in hand with transitioning to green energy solutions and a circular economy to reach net zero. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed significant areas of inequality and exclusion in the digital world, which need to be overcome. ITU research shows that 2.9 billion people remain offline, but on the quest to ensure that everyone benefits equally from the opportunities brought by digital technologies, it is essential to carefully weigh both the benefits and costs of ICTs, considering the triple planetary crisis. A growing digital society leads to an increasing amount of energy consumed, material used, and e-waste generated if not properly addressed. ITU has been providing countries technical assistance to develop national e-waste management policies and strategies, and the Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership, of which ITU is a founding member, helps monitor developments of e-waste over time. In addition, international standards, such as the ones developed by ITU, are vital as they provide common guidance on implementing circular economy principles, transitioning to green energy solutions, and helping the ICT sector and other sectors to reach the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Second, we would like to stress that the availability and dissemination of data and information is key towards evidence-based policymaking. As the world strives to implement climate-friendly policies and targets, growing numbers of stakeholders need high-quality data to make informed decisions. As a result, ITU WMO and the Digital Public Goods Alliance recently made a call for action for weather, climate, and hydrological data sets to be made open and freely available. Their joint report also highlighted that lack of data leads to setbacks and outlines the tangible steps that can be taken to help improve access to data, which includes developing international standards and best practices. This is also linked to my last point, the importance of protecting radio spectrum allocated to Earth monitoring and meteorological radio-based systems. They contribute directly or indirectly to achieving all the SDGs without a single exception. In addition, data obtained by using relevant radio systems are essential for monitoring progress towards the SDGs. For example, around 30 of the 232 SDG indicators require data obtained from remote sensing satellites. In this regard, one of the fundamental functions of the state is to create an enabling administrative and legal environment to ensure total radio silence in the bands that are used globally for monitoring various parameters of the Earth's atmosphere and surface by exploiting natural radio emissions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the International Telecommunications Union. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Nations Development Programme.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations Development Programme, I am delighted to deliver the statement at this important meeting. Stockholm+50 offers a critical platform that bridges the peace, development, environment nexus. It offers an opportunity to connect the dots across multiple crises: poverty, growing inequalities, conflict, fragility, poor health outcomes, debt, and food and energy insecurity. All of these challenges and their solutions are linked to our changing climate, environmental degradation, and pollution. As part of the Stockholm+50 preparations co-led by Sweden, Kenya, UNEP, and partners, UNDP has facilitated national consultations in over 50 countries with support from Sweden. These consultations have been designed to strengthen gender-responsive whole-of-society and whole-of-government dialogues, inform this international meeting, and advance national and sectoral policy frameworks including NDCs, NAPs, NBSUPs, Green Recovery Plans, and SDG strategies. Through these consultations, over 230 national events taking place with over 30,000 participants, half of them women, even more people having engaged virtually. Here are some of their recommendations. Countries call for stronger partnerships and improved means of implementation, capacity building, technology transfer, digitalization, and North-South and South-South cooperation. Strengthened environmental governance is needed to enhance participation, access to information, risk knowledge, trust, and a focus on the needs and knowledge of women, youth, indigenous people, local communities, people with disabilities, and other groups. There is a call to radically improve financing by scaling up smarter environmental finance across all sources: domestic, international, public, private, and hybrid. Nationally owned, integrated, and resilient solutions are needed to address the food, water, energy nexus, forests and fisheries, fragility and conflict, health, poverty and inequality, biodiversity loss, waste management, and climate change. A just and inclusive economic transformation is needed across all sectors, including infrastructure, extractives, agriculture, trade, textiles, and tourism, based on new metrics, with net positive investments in sustainable consumption, production, and circularity. Youth, representing almost 50% of consultation participants, have highlighted the need for greater access to information, climate and environment education and trainings, green jobs, innovation, digital technologies, and funding. Finally, countries are keen to see Stockholm+50 recommendations translated into bold, transformative follow-up action through fair and effective multilateralism. In line with our strategic plan, UNDP is committed to working with all partners to realize these recommendations. National reports and a global synthesis report on all the national consultations are being finalized as key inputs to this meeting. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the United Nations Development Programme.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to speak on behalf of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, CMS, here in Stockholm. The Stockholm Conference in 1972 was one of those extraordinary moments whose time had come. At the national level, it sparked the adoption of environmental laws and the creation of environmental agencies within national governments. It led to the creation of UNEP. It established the core principles of international environmental law, including the fact that countries cannot act in isolation, either in polluting, my pad is not working, either in polluting or in conserving the environment. But few people in this room may know that in 1972, governments called for a treaty to protect migratory wildlife, which led to the adoption of CMS in 1979. CMS is the only global agreement aimed at the conservation of migratory species and their habitats. The Stockholm Principles are embedded in what we do, providing an effective means for governments and partners to work together at the transboundary, regional, and international levels to address the conservation needs and threats to species protected by CMS. We cover all types of migratory species, birds, land animals, and aquatic species such as whales. And it provides practical solutions to issues such as reducing impacts from wind farms, linear infrastructure, and other threats. Migratory species are an integral part of nature and healthy ecosystems. You cannot have healthy ecosystems without species. Migratory species also contribute to national and local economies, to agriculture, food security, and jobs. Some migratory species have been valued as sequestering carbon at the value of millions of dollars. Yet, as you know, we are losing wild species of animals at an alarming, unprecedented rate. Migratory species are a good indicator of the state of our natural world, and it is not well. Despite many achievements, we continue to undervalue and thus destroy the nature that sustains us. Perhaps not surprisingly, the two biggest threats to migratory species of wild animals are the same as those that increase the risks of zoonotic diseases: habitat destruction and fragmentation, and overexploitation. As an international environmental lawyer, the Stockholm 72 meeting was a pinnacle moment, a bright light showing us the way forward. I'd like to recognize today two heroes and visionaries of that time, Dr. Wolfgang Berhenne and Françoise Berhenne, his wife, who helped create CMS and many other international legal agreements. Stockholm 72 told us clearly what needed to be done. It is up to us to deliver. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. I now give the floor to the representative of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights when I say that now is the time to heed the UN Secretary General's call to action for human rights, including his call made at the opening of this conference for states to embrace the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The Secretary General's remarks have been echoed and affirmed here by those of the UNEP Executive Director and countless others. Yesterday, OHCHR, working together with the UN Environment Management Group, Issue Management Group on Human Rights and the Environment, and several other UN partners, hosted the side event Coming Together for Healthy People and a Healthy Planet, the UN system's commitment to advancing the human right to a healthy environment. Participants, including states, UN agencies, civil society organizations, and Indigenous peoples' representatives, highlighted the need for urgent action to advance the right to a healthy environment. Pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss are already devastating people and communities around the world. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has described this triple planetary crisis as the greatest human rights challenge of our era. In October 2021, the Human Rights Council responded to this crisis by adopting Resolution 48/13, which recognizes the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. All people everywhere are entitled to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and eat safe food, to enjoy their environment and to stand up for it without fear of persecution and reprisal, to freely exercise their rights to participation, access to information, and access to justice in environmental matters. Ensuring environmental human rights defenders, including women, young, and Indigenous defenders, can safely exercise these rights must be at the heart of our efforts to protect the environment. In addition to being an obligation under human rights law, rights-based environmental action is also more effective. According to the latest IPCC report on adaptation, rights-based approaches that focus on capacity building, meaningful participation of those in vulnerable situations, and their access to key resources reduce vulnerability to climate change and lead to more legitimate and effective action. We need to deliver concrete and actionable commitments for gender-responsive, rights-based environmental action that protects the people whose rights are most at risk from environmental harm. This should include adequate financing of environmental action by those who can best afford it, including financing of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. We can truly commemorate Stockholm+50 by making 2022 a turning point for people and the planet in law, policy, and practice by committing to the realization of the human right to a healthy environment for all people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. We stand at a pivotal time in history which requires visionary leadership and action at all levels to redirect our development pathways. Safeguarding the Earth's biodiversity is a defining task of this decade. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework being prepared for adoption at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity later this year will be crucial to this objective. The new framework will address not only the direct drivers of biodiversity loss, but also the underlying drivers which lie in our sustainable patterns of consumption and production. It will serve to catalyze integrated approaches across governments, stakeholders, the UN system, enhancing and unifying action. Without an ambitious biodiversity framework with adequate means of implementation, we will jeopardize the achievements of our global objectives of climate change, land degradation neutrality, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Immediate action must be taken
by all to implement the new framework. Distinguished delegates, there has been a visible rise of momentum for action on biodiversity over the last 2 years. The UN Summit on Biodiversity in 2020 provided commitment at the highest political level. Biodiversity received more attention at the Glasgow Climate Conference than ever before in climate negotiations. Numerous stakeholders coalitions, including subnational governments and cities, business and finance networks, and indigenous peoples and local communities have all announced strong commitments to address biodiversity loss. The reaffirmation of commitment you are making at the Stockholm+50 International Meeting will provide further momentum to an ambitious global agreement on biodiversity. By placing nature at the heart of sustainable development, let us take decisive action for the sake of the present and future generations. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity.
I now give the floor to the representative of the International Development Law Organization.
Excellencies, it is a pleasure to address this meeting on behalf of the International Development Law Organization, the only global intergovernmental organization exclusively devoted to promoting the rule of law to advance peace and sustainable development. 50 years ago, the Stockholm Declaration set out a path for correcting our relationship with our planet, and it outlined our right to an environment that permits a life of dignity and well-being, while also entrusting us to protect that environment for present and future generations. While our world looks very different today, the spirit of the Declaration is more important than ever, and the fulfillment of its commitments all the more critical, given the slow and uneven progress over 5 decades. At IDLO, we believe that issues of justice, human rights, fairness, and equity are fundamentally intertwined with the causes and effects of climate change. Addressing them must be at the heart of the response. And through our country programs, research, and policy advocacy, we promote the rule of law's contribution to transformative climate action. Allow me to make 3 brief points on why a justice lens is essential to tackling the climate crisis. First, the rule of law is fundamental for inclusive governance of land and natural resources and gives greater agency to the communities who depend on them. By strengthening both formal and customary justice systems, it can empower those with the least capacity to adapt to advocate for their rights. Second, the rule of law can enable women and girls to participate in and lead efforts to achieve climate justice. A rule of law-based approach can enable equal access to justice and promote laws and institutions that are more responsive to the climate needs of women and girls. And third, the rule of law provides an effective basis for the cooperation required for green growth among and within states, as well as with civil society, the private sector, academia, and youth. It promotes confidence by reducing corruption, improving transparency, and establishing mechanisms through which implementing partners can be held to account. And confidence that agreements will be upheld is crucial for their success at all levels. Climate change is an issue of intergenerational justice, not just for the present, but particularly for future generations. We must mitigate its effects, support those most affected to adapt, and lay the groundwork for a greener, sustainable, and more just future. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the International Development Law Organization. In accordance with relevant provisions of General Assembly Resolution 75/326, the meeting will now hear statements by representatives of non-governmental organizations and other stakeholders. I now give the floor to the representative of Children and Youth Major Group to the report on regional consultations.
Excellencies, dear colleagues,
More than 2,000 stakeholders have come together in a lead-up to Stockholm+50 in 5 regional multi-stakeholder consultations for a bottom-up approach in mapping key actions needed to safeguard our planet. Here are 6 of the world region's messages for you. First, we need a very deep transformation of our economies to ensure a well-being, focused, regenerative economic system. Our economies must move away from a linear, profit-driven, market-driven business model that benefits a few and wrecks our planet. We need you to orient economic policies at new metrics beyond GDP, such as a happiness index that measures health, well-being, social justice, and a clean environment. Second, we need you, decision makers, to end the fossil fuel era now. Stop all investments and subsidies, put a real price tag on carbon, move rapidly to renewables with strong support for those regions and communities that depend on extraction. Our dependencies on fossil fuels finance weapons, they drive wars, as we're seeing painfully now in Ukraine and elsewhere around the globe. The countries that have emitted most over history need to mobilize the finances to make up for the loss and damages for the poorest. The extractive economic model has not led to sustainable and equitable development in the global south. It continues to steer environmental and social conflict globally. For the raw materials needed for the transition, stakeholders call on you to ensure that mining can only happen under very strict conditions and where local communities are made partners and take decisions. Third, we need to make sure global value chains become truly sustainable. We do not need more trade, we need better trade. We need to prioritize traditional and local producers. We need trade that's based on the respect of human rights and fair prices for small-scale producers and local communities. Fourth, we must move to a circular economy with products designed to last, to be repaired, and to be recycled. Throwaway items have no place in the future. We need an ambitious and encompassing, binding global treaty to end plastic pollution. And we want you to negotiate in good faith for the benefits of people and the planet, and not for profit. Fifth, a critical shift is needed in agriculture. Proposed actions are to focus all support in agroecological farming, to use biofertilizers, to phase out chemical pesticides, to support local and indigenous knowledge systems, to protect seeds, local seeds, to address food losses, and to put small-scale farmers at the heart of all action. Finally, we need a much stronger legal framework with mandatory due diligence for all transnational companies. They need to be liable for the negative impact. We call on you to recognize environmental defenders and whistleblowers and to ensure their protection. We need you to criminalize ecocide, to recognize the rights of nature and make the right to a healthy, clean and sustainable environment a reality for all. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Children and Youth Major Group. I now give the floor to the representative of major groups to read an interfaith statement.
Thank you very much, Presidency. Distinguished delegates, my name is Alejandro Luque, young environmental advocate from Ecuador. To follow my colleague Patricia's intervention, we urge as well that the new economic thinking must also drive a sustainable and just recovery. All investment must be directed to scaling up sustainable sectors and transforming high-impact sectors such as energy generation, manufacturing, and large-scale agriculture. We need to build on citizen science to ensure active and meaningful participation of cultural relevant groups such as women, youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities in decision-making processes, as well as implementation and monitoring. The promotion of green jobs and ensuring environmental education for youth in all school curricula must be ensured at all levels. It is crucial to make future generations capable with new green knowledge and skills, including capacitation on the digital transformation. Indigenous peoples' rights and knowledge must be included as part of the solutions for a healthy planet. Respecting indigenous rights provides the spaces for everyone to advance towards a sustainable future. They must share knowledge and practices as active members of societies and in policymaking. Peoples, including through free, prior and informed consent must be included. This was particularly highlighted as a priority in the Global South to protect our environmental defenders. Wars should be over. It is not possible that due to cowardness, the fear, the greed, and incapacity of certain people, millions of people are now being killed by hunger or bullets. We need to commit on people-centered development to ensure that no one is left behind. There are regional reports for each of the regional multi-stakeholder consultations for Stockholm+50, as well as the synthesis report that gathers the key recommendations from each region. We therefore put these reports on your tables, now raising the key messages from the regional consultations that without hesitations, we need to be included in the summary report for Stockholm+50, as well as the Stockholm+50 Global Youth Policy Paper. In every nation's working plan of implementation under commitment post-Stockholm+50. Let's rebuild trust, ensure meaningful engagement, and commit to an inclusive governance among governments and all stakeholders. The power is in us to change, and as well the power is in youth. Thank you for the floor, and let's ensure we rescue our future. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Children and Youth Major Group and apologize there was a secretarial error in the introduction.
I now give the floor to the representative of major groups to read an interfaith statement.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, I have the privilege to share a part of the Interfaith statement from the Interfaith for Earth dialogues. Our analysis as people of faith is not unique. We share the same world, we listen to the same scientists, and we see the same droughts and storms. But when it comes to solutions, faith communities bring something different and essential to the common table. This Interfaith statement is the result of 7 global meetings over several months with the contribution of more than 40 faith and interfaith organizations. This statement has been endorsed by more than 230 faith leaders representing 145 organizations from 45 countries. It has been submitted to the Secretary General of the conference and the co-chairs. Faith leaders speak words of both hope and comfort, but even more so, words of warning and a call to change of mind and action based in a perspective bigger than any human. Our common crisis is moral and existential. It needs a holistic solution. The crisis demands that the contribution of faith communities is taken seriously at the common table. The root causes of the triple planetary crisis are deeply fueled by structural greed and apathy that underpin our current economic system. We humans have failed in our responsibility as Earth keepers to protect the planet. We must rediscover the moral and spiritual roots of human beings and the rights and dignity of all beings. We affirm that faith and indigenous leaders and actors have the potential to play an essential role in shaping global environmental governance and policy making. The traditions that we represent have unique capacities to convince, convene, and contribute meaningful, moral, economic, spiritual, and social substance to the public deliberations. We are carriers of the narrative needed for a new understanding of our role as keepers of the earth. We must recognize the role of faith, ethics, spiritual and cultural values in environmental governance through adopting a resolution to that effect by the United Nations Environmental Assembly and provide a required platform and program for engaging faith actors in policy dialogue. We must adopt a new development paradigm that integrates moral, spiritual, and indigenous shared values. And we ask for the recognition of ecocide as an international crime. We commit ourselves to act and practice what we preach, and to become protectors of this earth, to strive to live in harmony and sustainability through our daily actions, how we invest, how we manage our assets, and how we engage within our faith communities. And we demand this contribution to be included in the report of the conference. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the major groups. I now give the floor to the representative of the women major group.
Thank you, Chairs, Excellencies. It is my honor to present key messages from the Women and Gender Equality Group. I am Dr. Priscilla Achakpa, Women Environmental Program Nigeria, and representative of the Women's Major Group. National Stockholm+50 consultations were held in 57 countries, supported by UNDP, with more than 15,000 participants, which were in majority women and feminists. Let me share key messages that came out of these consultations. 1, women and girls have the right to meaningful participation in climate and environment decision-making. We need women to be at the negotiation tables at regional and national level, because women are among the most impacted by climate change in terms of mortality, loss of livelihood, food insecurity, burden of unpaid care work, and exposure to climate-induced conflicts and gender-based violence. We call on all countries to commit to a gender-responsive, just transition to a green economy in order to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis. This requires women's equal rights to land tenure, finance, and support for rural women and farmers and their control over natural resources. Furthermore, we call on all to significantly increase gender-responsive climate and environment finance for women to take leadership in building resilience, financing adaptation, and loss and damage. We call on all countries, UN agencies, and multilateral organizations to create national-level climate and gender policies, as we did in Nigeria, where my organization, WEP, jointly with the Federal Minister of Environment, led a process of consultations resulting in a national action plan on gender and climate change. Also, the Climate Change Act, which was recently acceded to by Mr. President, has specific provisions for women and youth representation in the Council. We call on all countries to strengthen and expand gender-responsive social protection systems to build resilience to economic and environmental shocks faced by women and girls. We call on all countries to ensure public participation and access to information and justice for women, youth, indigenous peoples, local communities, and people with disabilities. Finally, Excellencies, we encourage countries to furthermore develop feminist, sustainable development environment and climate policies. Gender issues are environment issues. We must protect our planet. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Women Major Group. I now give the floor to the representative of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group.
Dear friends, my name is Sara Elvira Kuchmanen. I am the president of the Sami Youth Association Saminora. I have been given the opportunity to address you. I welcome you to Sweden, one of the 4 states overlapping with the Sami people's traditional territory, Sápmi. After 50 years of multilateral environmental action, we must recognize that the actions for protecting the diversity of life on Earth have been insufficient. We are facing a climate catastrophe. Indigenous people have safeguarded biodiversity on our traditional territories. Now we have the majority of the remaining biodiversity on Earth on these territories. There is time for a paradigm shift in conservation, recognizing the role of indigenous peoples and supporting our ways of conserving and sustainably using our lands. To achieve the bold and urgent action needed to secure a better future on a healthy planet, which is the goal of this meeting, nation-states need to take clear action to uphold their commitments during the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, particularly to respect, recognize and protect the lands, territories and resources of indigenous peoples and our rights to all elements of our food systems. This is imperative also for leaving no one behind in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As the world looks for a united response to climate change, bold action and transformative change is required to really alter current economic, social, and financial models from harmful to sustainable long-term. However, current ambitions make it impossible to reach these goals of the Paris Agreement and keep us below 1.5 degrees. We must scale up the ambition with urgent policy action to halt destructive climate change. To achieve this, equitable partnership with indigenous people is crucial when designing and implementing effective climate actions. So is also securing that finance flows cover those most affected in all 7 indigenous cultural regions of the world, covering all indigenous peoples. Ethically and equitably engaging indigenous knowledge can contribute to addressing the combined challenges of climate change, food security, biodiversity conservation, and combating desertification and land degradation. With policies and actions that ensure compliance to international human rights standards, and with respect for the rights of indigenous peoples, we can find the best collaborative solutions to achieve the effective actions needed to secure a better future on a healthy planet. Ologito. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group.
I now give the floor to a second representative of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, invited guests, all protocols observed. You must be wondering why we have 2 indigenous peoples. It's because I'm from Kenya and she's from Sweden, and so I had to come and compliment her and really want to thank everyone for being here. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Sami representative who had just spoken, and also to thank all the Sami families and people from this particular region for giving us the right to be here. It's also that I want to thank UNEP for making sure that a number of indigenous people have been able to participate in this particular meeting. I am happy to be here 50 years after Stockholm, because I'm one of the beneficiaries of being from Kenya and also benefiting from learning from UNEP, and it's really great that I'm here. What I want to say is that as Indigenous people, we want to remind all of you what has already been spoken and what my colleague from SAMI has already spoken is that we want to ensure that you should respect all the requirements that have been already given by different people within these particular discussions that we've had. We've had discussions on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We've also been able to discuss issues on climate change and on desertification, and also looking at other discussions on sustainable development goals and issues on food security and so on. All these are linked together, and as Indigenous people, we feel that these particular issues are very important, and because they are linked, we want you to honor all the agreements and the pledges that have already been done, because this is very crucial that these are implemented and be able to be honored. As Indigenous people, we are also requesting that it's important for you to be able to look at the different instruments that have been already put in place, and some of the governments and states have already signed to these particular instruments. The UN Declaration on Indigenous People, the ILO 169, and many others of the human rights that have already been mentioned. It's very important that they are really very much respected. We know that we have only been given 3 minutes, but we have a declaration which we have already made, and we are going to submit it to UNEP so that it can be also distributed to different participants, and they can be able to see what are more issues that we are bringing up in this particular Stockholm. As Indigenous people, we are not stopping here. We are really going to continue working together as usual, and we really want to make sure that you have our, where we have to really make sure our human rights respected and be able to be followed in whatever we are going to demand for the next coming few years. We want also to really be able to work with the other Indigenous communities and also the major groups and be working together so that we can be able to achieve our goals. And we want the governments to know that every discussion that is being done must be done with the presence of Indigenous people, youth, women, and other major groups that are working with us all. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. I now give the floor to the representative of the Local Authorities Major Group.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellencies, I am delivering this statement on behalf of the subnational stakeholder group, which consists of organizations working to advance sustainability at the town, city, and regional level. I am personally deeply involved with these issues as Minister of Climate, Environment, Energy and Higher Education on Åland. The Åland Islands, a 100-year-old autonomous area of Finland, is an archipelago of more than 6,000 islands with a population of nearly 30,000 people. Countries may hog the limelight in international negotiations, but progress on sustainability is won or lost at the local level, shaped by the daily decisions of mayors, city councils, and regional governments. It is they who are at the forefront of our response to the triple planetary crisis. Their decisions shape the world we inhabit, and that we will pass on to our children. They provide the services on which we rely, and they plan the landscapes in which we live. They are the midpoint between the individual and the nation. All around the world, local governments are showing leadership on sustainability and are finding innovative solutions that mobilize local communities to meet national commitments. Just this week, in this city, a group of 100+ mayors have gathered in the city Stockholm+50 high-level forum to focus on the issue of consumption-based emissions. It is critical that Stockholm+50 is informed and inspired by this experience and expertise. The stakes are huge. The decisions taken in the next few years by local and regional authorities will shape our prospects for decades. As much as 3/4 of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 has not yet been built. Ultimately, the way we design and manage our lives at the local level will determine whether we will be able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. For that to happen, governments at all levels need to work together to deliver meaningful impact. Stockholm+50 is an opportunity to set out a vision for the future. This can be a vision characterized by integrated solutions where subnational authorities enable a healthy planet and the opportunity for everyone to flourish, with planning that facilitates resource efficiency and the phasing out of fossil fuels, builds resilience to climate change, promotes zero-carbon buildings, green zones, and a circular economy where water and waste loops are closed. We are convinced by the potential of inclusive multilateral action, but we also recognize the need to act where we live. The phrase, think global, act local, it is still the best four-word plan we have. We should empower citizens to make it a reality. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the local authorities major group. I now give the floor to the representative of the scientific and technological community major group.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a brief message on behalf of science and technology and scholarship that we have engaged with over the last year to bring to the table robust knowledge and perspectives for this meeting. I draw on particularly two processes. The first, the preparation of the report Stockholm+50, Unlocking a Better Future, written by Stockholm Environment Institute and the Council on Energy, Environment and Water of India, with contributions from many researchers and an international advisory panel. The second, a letter from Science, convened by Stockholm Environment Institute, the International Science Council and Future Earth, which was summarized and published by Nature on June 1st, just 2 days ago. We call on all readers, including scientists and scholars, and all attendants here to read and sign this letter. In these times of near-term crisis and urgency, Stockholm+50 is an important moment to keep also the more long-term in focus, our common threats to our home, Earth, improving the conditions for action and accelerating change. As reflected in all the international scientific assessments over the last decade, we have the knowledge that could unlock a better future for all of us. But we need a new watershed moment here at Stockholm+50, because the action gap is daunting. Since 1972, institutions have been built, goals and targets have been set, and the science has delivered knowledge and technology. But still, only around 1/10 of the hundreds of global environment and sustainable development targets agreed by countries have been achieved or even seen significant progress. Our synthesis of scientific research and new ideas points to three broad shifts that are needed to unlock action: redefining our relationship with nature, ensuring lasting prosperity for all, and investing in a sustainable future, but also the need of overcoming structural barriers that hold back progress. Accelerating the pace of change requires bold and science-based decision-making. We need to compress timescales in this decade, but also extend time horizons to avoid lock-in. A first step will be to meet the current international commitments to reduce pollution, improve conservation, and tackle climate change. Accountability, naming and acclaiming countries and companies that deliver on pledges will inspire action. All sectors of society need to act now. We, in the scientific, engineering, and scholarly community, must deepen our engagement, build bridges that span disciplines, geographies, and income discrepancies, and ensure that technological innovation is socially responsible. Together with our teaching, research, and technological skills, we can help to achieve sustainability, justice, and dignity for all. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the scientific and technological community major group.
I now give the floor to two representatives of the Children and Youth Major Group to deliver a joint statement.
Dear Excellencies and distinguished delegates, my name is Luciana Vázquez Rubio and I'm a 18-year-old youth delegate from Peru.
My name is Rhiannon Mackie and I am a 17-year-old youth delegate from New Zealand. Thank you for the kāraga. We are speaking today on behalf of the Children and Youth Major Group.
Today's youth are more active than ever in global environmental spaces, and these advocates for environmental justice must be present in all decision-making spaces in order for processes to be reflective of the needs of the future. However, we must acknowledge the inequities of global systems that mean many of our Global South colleagues are unable to attend meetings such as this. This is unacceptable, and we want to stress the importance of inclusive processes that enable all youth to make their voices heard.
The Stockholm+50 Youth Task Force and Working Group have coordinated consultations around expected outcomes from Stockholm+50 over the past 8 months. Globally, youth have come together to give inputs on this, and we expect this to set a clear standard for all youth engagement in all decision-making processes moving forward. We youth have created a global youth policy paper compiling our holistic demands. We urge member states to focus on producing concrete commitments throughout this meeting for implementation within the decade of action, such as, but not limited to, take immediate action to protect all ecosystems by halting environmentally destructive processes and introducing ecocide as a crime into the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Align all post-pandemic recovery spending into green jobs and investments, ensuring targeted funding for children and youth, civil society, and marginalized groups. Transition to regenerative agriculture that strengthens biodiversity and improves carbon sequestration, including support for small-scale farmers. Expand formal and non-formal environmental education to enhance capacity among youth, prepare them for green jobs, and build a sustainable future. Immediately establish a legally binding fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and majorly scale up renewable energy production for a much higher ratio in the global energy matrix. Adopt participatory and inclusive decision-making processes at every level to ensure the meaningful engagement of all rights holders, highlighting youth and those most strongly affected by the triple planetary crisis.
We specifically request that the Stockholm+50 Global Youth Policy Paper and all youth intervention comments be included as part of the meeting report to ensure our voices are heard. Member states are failing to deliver on their pledges to build a sustainable future. Time is running out, and we have had enough. Stockholm+50 must be a turning point towards a better future for all, and we call on member states to engage with us meaningfully. We have an obligation to deliver strong commitments to ensure a better world for not only today's youth, but the generations of the future. The time for environmental justice is now, and the world is watching. Thank you.
I thank the representatives of the Children and Youth Major Group. I now give the floor to the representative of the Business and Industry Major Group.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as a member of the B Team, a global collective of business and civil society leaders that works to make business a force for sustainable development, we have 3 calls to action which must be achieved in the next 6 months to ensure that in the next 50 years of sustainable development is a success. Action number 1, address preserve incentives and get economics right by committing to environmentally harmful subsidies reform by 2030 and fossil fuel subsidies by 2025 as a part of an ambitious global biodiversity framework. This year, and without further delay, the CBD COP15. In a recent report, the B team and the partners estimates that globally, we spend at least 1.8 trillion annually on subsidies that destroy nature. This is equivalent of 2% of the global GDP. We must reform and repurpose this inefficiency is spent and align all financial to a net zero and a nature positive future. Action number 2, secure the universal human rights to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environmental at the United Nations General Assembly in June 2022. We must urgently strengthen the legal aspect of sustainable development and provide a legal underpinning to environmental and climate justice. Action number 3, enhance transparency and accountability by supporting harmonized ESG standards like International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, a global baseline for a corporate sustainability reporting will provide transparent, comparable, and consistent information for capital markets. Financial regulators in all geographies should align with the ISSB baseline across environmental, social, and governance factors. All of these calls to actions must be delivered through a just and inclusive transition in response to the triple planetary crisis. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the business and industry major group.
I now give the floor to the representative of the major groups consortium.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the environment, my name is Jan Gustav Strandenes, representing Stakeholder Forum for a Sustainable Future. I am a Norwegian national, and 50 years ago, I was working as an intern with the Morris Strong team for the UN Conference on the Human Environment. This conference gave us a series of legacies which made UNEP into what it is today, and which we should celebrate. And one legacy has made it possible for me to stand here today. The 1972 conference was the first intergovernmental UN conference to allow civil society to address the official plenary on a daily, regular basis, thus nourishing environmental governance and improving environmental performance. This right of civil society to participate must be protected. I'm here today to describe to you a report in progress titled The People's Environment Narrative, which will be available to the United Nations and to the world in September this year. With the support of UNEP, the Swedish government, and Forum Norway, we produced this report. It is primarily structured according to 7 legacy themes and traces the development of these themes, which found their inspiration in 1972 and have been key in forming UNEP and the work for the environment. Their themes are civil society and UNEP, environmental diplomacy and the need for multilateralism, science and the environment, environmental rights, human rights, and environmental justice, the environment, education, and the future, connecting the dots, making a forceful canon of the Rio Conventions and the multilateral environmental agreements, and finally, strengthening environmental governance and law. We kindly request that the report be added to the outcome document from this conference. This commemorative conference in Stockholm and the one that was held in March this year, UNDP 50, have focused on the precarious state of the world in which we all are living today. We are now moving out from a global pandemic, also caused by our mistreatment of the environment, only to be thrown into an uncalled for, unreasonable conflict of war on this continent. We have emphasized time and again that if we do not act now, time may be running out for our efforts to save this planet. Friends, I'm an optimist, and I believe that we need to look for opportunities based on all the knowledge we have today. A crucial segment of our report seeks to highlight ways forward with input from our global legacy experts and from 1,000 stakeholders. We have compiled nearly 20 pages of recommendations that may strengthen UNEP and strengthen our efforts to safeguard the planet with opportunities for all, which was already stated in the Stockholm Declaration 50 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, as a historian, I would like to say that we've come a long way in a short period of time, but as an environmentalist, we have not come far enough. We can celebrate today 50 years of struggle for the environment, but we cannot rest on our laurels. We have to move forward and do so fast. As we point to in our report, we have the knowledge, we have the money, and in most contexts, we know what to do. Let us not hesitate, but act, and act now. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the major groups consortium. That was the last statement on behalf of major groups and stakeholders. I now give the floor to the representative of the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
Ladies and gentlemen, to overcome the triple planetary crisis of nature loss, climate change, and pollution, our actions must be based on collaboration, adaptation, and innovation. Crucial to this endeavor are nature-based solutions, as defined by IUCN members in 2016 and recently corroborated by the United Nations Environment Assembly 5.2 in March 2022. Great strides were made over the last 50 years, instigating the recovery of our planet's ozone layer and the phasing out of leaded fuel, amongst many others. The close links between the environment, human well-being, and prosperity have now become clearer than ever. By reconvening here in Stockholm, we commit to multilateral action towards planetary health and peace. IUCN congratulates the Kingdom of Sweden and the Republic of Kenya for convening the Stockholm+50 meeting, as well as the United Nations Environment Programme. As we look towards World Environment Day this Sunday, we are inspired by its theme of Only One Earth, the same slogan as that of the 1972 Stockholm Conference. Now, 50 years on, it reminds us that this is indeed still true. The planet is our only home. We need courageous and bold action. We need to change our consumption and production patterns. Governments globally spend around 1.5 trillion a year on subsidies for fossil fuels and agriculture that are harmful to nature. We could instead use these funds to develop new and innovative technologies, invest in sustainable agriculture, in nature-based solutions, and create a prosperous society today and for future generations. We have the means to create a sustainable economy, but we need the political will to make this change happen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
We have heard the last speaker on the list for the general debate. I thank all speakers for their contribution to the rich discussion. The international meeting has thus concluded its consideration of agenda item number 7. The closing segment of the international meeting will begin in this hall at 6 p.m. The meeting is now suspended until 6 p.m.